Pastor Alexandre, this church's name was used to ask for emergency payroll money. The church was supposed to be protected during the pandemic, like every other small place trying to survive.
Rooldy Alexandre dedicated his life to leading a congregation and being the financial steward of his church. The profession that gave him that trust is the exact thing he turned into, a $662 federal fraud scheme. And it's about to cost him everything.
The case says the honest application was not enough, so a false one replaced it. That is the turn I cannot make sound like ministry.
He would not get the chance to finish that sentence. Within 90 minutes, federal agents would have his church laptop, his personal phone, and the second cell phone he kept inside his desk drawer in a manila envelope. $662,454. 2 counts of wire fraud. 24 months in a federal prison camp. The investigation that ended with Rooldy Alexandre standing in his own foyer in handcuffs began with a single number on a small business administration spreadsheet that did not match a single number on his church's federal tax filings. Before we go any further, I have to ask you this. When a man stands behind a pulpit and asks his congregation to trust him with the offering plate, what does that trust actually mean to you? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to read every single one. And if you are new here, hit subscribe. We cover cases the mainstream press buries on page 11, and we cover them properly. Rooldy Alexandre was born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, in 1970. His father drove a tap-tap, the brightly painted shared taxis that crowded the capital's streets, and his mother sold produce at the Marché Salomon on Saturday mornings. The family lived in a 2-room house in the Carrefour neighborhood, and when Rooldy was 9 years old, his parents made the decision that thousands of other Haitian families were making in the late 1970s. They sold what they had, paid a cousin in Brooklyn to sponsor them, and boarded a flight to John F. Kennedy International Airport on a humid morning in August of 1979. The family settled in East Flatbush, Brooklyn, in a 3rd-floor walk-up on Rogers Avenue. Rooldy's father took an overnight job stocking shelves at a key food supermarket on Nostrand Avenue, and his mother cleaned offices in the financial district 6 nights a week. They became members of a small Haitian Pentecostal congregation that met above a coin laundromat on Church Avenue, and Rooldy attended every service, every Bible study, every Saturday youth group from the moment they arrived. By the time he was 13, the older men of the congregation were already saying that he had the gift. He memorized scripture in 3 languages. He could quote Romans chapter 8 from start to finish in Haitian, Creole, French, and English without missing a word. He graduated from Erasmus Hall High School in Brooklyn in 1988 with a B+ average and a written recommendation from his youth pastor. He enrolled at Nyack College in Rockland County, paying his tuition with a combination of Pell Grants, a partial denominational scholarship, and money he earned working summers at a Haitian-owned moving company on Flatbush Avenue. He studied biblical literature and pastoral ministry. A faculty advisor wrote in his junior year evaluation that Rooldy showed exceptional dedication to Scripture, a calming presence with troubled students, and a clear sense of vocation. After graduation, he completed a Master of Divinity at the Alliance Theological Seminary in 1995, and he was ordained the following spring in a ceremony at the same Brooklyn church where he had grown up. He met Esther Joseph, a nursing student from Cap Haitien, at a Haitian community picnic in Prospect Park in the summer of 1996. They were married 11 months later. Their first daughter, Naomi, was born in 1999. Their son, Daniel, followed in 2002. In 2007, Alexandre and his family moved to Philadelphia. A small Haitian congregation in the city's only neighborhood was looking for a new pastor after their founder retired, and Alexandre's name had been passed along by a senior cleric in Brooklyn. The church was officially called Église évangélique de la Nouvelle Alliance, the Evangelical Church of the New Covenant, but everyone in the neighborhood just called it Nouvelle Alliance. It met in a converted storefront on North 5th Street, just south of Olney Avenue, with seating for about 90 people and a small fellowship hall in the basement where the women's group served coffee and Haitian patties after each Sunday service. The position came with a modest annual stipend of $28,000, use of a parsonage on North 6th Street, and the title of sole employee of the church. Alexandre handled the preaching, the counseling, the marriages and funerals, the door-to-door outreach in the Haitian neighborhoods of Olney and Logan, and the church's finances. He held the only signature on the church's checking account at a Citizens Bank branch 4 blocks from the building. He filed the church's annual paperwork with the Internal Revenue Service. He renewed the lease. He paid the electric bill. He balanced the books at the end of every quarter at the same wooden desk in the same office at the back of the building. For more than a decade, no one else looked at the numbers. In March of 2020, as COVID-19 spread across the United States and businesses began shutting down, Congress passed the CARES Act. Part of that legislation created the Paycheck Protection Program, administered by the Small Business Administration. The program was designed to keep small businesses and nonprofits afloat during the pandemic, and it would eventually distribute more than $800 billion to roughly 12 million applicants. Religious nonprofits, including small storefront churches like Nouvelle Alliance, were specifically authorized to apply. The mechanism was simple by federal program standards. An eligible employer submitted an application through a participating bank or financial technology lender. The application required the employer to certify, under penalty of perjury, the number of employees on payroll, the average monthly payroll cost, and that the loan was necessary to support ongoing operations. The maximum loan amount was calculated as 2.5 times the average monthly payroll. If the funds were used within a covered period to pay payroll, rent, and utilities, the loan would be forgiven in full. No money paid back, no interest charged. The program was designed for speed. Money was being deployed in days, not months. Banks were processing thousands of applications per week. The Small Business Administration relied almost entirely on the applicant's own certification. There was no independent verification of payroll figures at the time of application. There were no in-person audits. There was no requirement that the employer submit copies of payroll tax filings before receiving the money. The entire system rested on the assumption that the people applying for emergency relief were telling the truth about how many people worked for them. For most applicants, they were. For a small minority, the trust-based design of the Paycheck Protection Program was an invitation. By the time the program closed in May of 2021, federal investigators would estimate that more than $64 billion had been distributed to fraudulent applicants. The Department of Justice would create a dedicated COVID-19 fraud enforcement task force with prosecutors and agents pulled from the FBI, the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, the Small Business Administration Office of Inspector General, and the United States Postal Inspection Service. Rooldy Alexandre filled out his first PPP application on April 14, 2020. The first application was honest. He sat at his small wooden desk in the church office on North 5th Street, opened the laptop, logged into the portal at a community development financial institution that was processing PPP applications for small Philadelphia nonprofits, and entered the actual numbers. One employee himself, at an annual salary of $28,000, average monthly payroll, approximately $2,300. The calculation produced a loan amount that would have been somewhere in the neighborhood of $5,800. $5,800 would not pay the church's rent for 2 months. It would not cover the electric bill that had jumped after the freezer in the fellowship hall stopped working in February. It would not buy the new sound system the deacons had been asking about for 3 years. It would not do any of the things that Alexandre had begun, over the course of that spring, to imagine the money doing. He withdrew the application before submission. He closed the laptop. He went home for the evening. 3 days later, he made a phone call to a man in Florida. The man's name was Jocelyn Pierre. He lived in Pompano Beach, and he had been running what he advertised on a Haitian Creole language Facebook page as consulting services for small business owners since the first wave of PPP applications had opened. What Pierre was actually doing, federal investigators would later document, was preparing fraudulent applications for clients across at least 14 states in exchange for a cut of the loan proceeds. The standard arrangement was 30% of the inflated amount, paid in cash or by wire, to a bank account in his wife's maiden name. Pierre and Alexandre spoke for 43 minutes on the evening of April 17, 2020. The phone records would later be subpoenaed. They spoke again 3 times over the following week. By the time the second PPP application for Église évangélique de la Nouvelle Alliance was submitted on April 27, 2020, the church had been transformed on paper. Where there had been 1 employee, there were now 26. Where there had been an average monthly payroll of $2,300, there was now an average monthly payroll of more than $41,000. The supporting documentation included fabricated IRS Form 941 quarterly tax filings, fabricated payroll summaries, and a fabricated list of employees with Social Security numbers that did not, in any documented universe, work for a 90-seat storefront church in North Philadelphia. The loan was approved. On May 11, 2020, the sum of $263,740 was deposited into the church's Citizens Bank account. Within 72 hours, Alexandre had wired 31% of that sum to a Bank of America account in Pompano Beach. Within 2 weeks, he had moved another $78,000 to a personal checking account he had opened in his own name at a different bank, listing the transfer in the memo line as minister's housing allowance. He paid the church's rent. He paid the electric bill. He did not buy the sound system. He did, in the months that followed, purchase a 2018 Lexus RX 350 with cash from a dealership in Bensalem, pay off the remaining balance on the parsonage's central air conditioning installation, and send his daughter Naomi to begin her sophomore year at Temple University without applying for the financial aid she had previously depended on. In January of 2021, Congress authorized a second draw of PPP loans for businesses and nonprofits that had already received a first loan and could demonstrate continued financial hardship. Alexandre called his sister. Marielle Alexandre was 48 years old and lived in a rented apartment in the West Oak Lane neighborhood of Philadelphia. She worked as a home health aide for an agency that contracted with the city, and she had, until that phone call, never been involved in her brother's church finances. Federal prosecutors would later allege, and Marielle would eventually admit in a separate proceeding, that her role was straightforward. She allowed her bank account to be used as a pass-through. She accepted wire transfers from the church's accounts. She withdrew portions in cash and delivered them to her brother. She kept a percentage for herself. The second draw PPP application for Église évangélique de la Nouvelle Alliance was submitted in February of 2021. It used the same fabricated employee figures as the first application, adjusted only for inflation. The loan amount approved was $248,714. By the end of March, more than half of that amount had been moved through Marielle Alexandre's checking account and returned to her brother in cash and personal wires. By that point, however, the system that had distributed the money was beginning, finally, to look at it. In late 2020, the Small Business Administration's Office of Inspector General had begun running automated pattern detection algorithms against the entire PPP loan portfolio. The algorithms compared self-reported payroll figures on PPP applications against payroll tax filings the same employers had submitted to the Internal Revenue Service in 2018 and 2019. Discrepancies above a certain threshold were flagged for human review. Église évangélique de la Nouvelle Alliance was flagged in April of 2021. The church's IRS filings for 2018 and 2019 reported a single employee earning $28,000. The church's PPP applications reported 26 employees earning a combined $492,000. That discrepancy alone would have triggered a review. What turned the review into a federal investigation was a second flag, raised at almost the same time, from a different direction. A former member of the congregation, a woman named Yvette Charles, whose family had attended the church for 6 years, had contacted the FBI's Philadelphia field office in March of 2021 after Alexandre approached her at a Sunday service and offered to help her apply for a PPP loan on behalf of the small home daycare she ran out of her basement. Charles, whose oldest son was a corporal in the Air Force, did not need help applying for anything. She had already declined PPP funding because she did not qualify and had no intention of qualifying dishonestly. What Alexandra had described to her in a hushed conversation in the church fellowship hall over a paper plate of griot and rice sounded to her like a crime. She wrote it down word for word that night. She called the field office the next morning. The case was assigned to Special Agent Brian Whitmore of the FBI's Philadelphia field office and Special Agent Teresa Kowalski of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. They opened a joint file in May of 2021 and began doing what federal investigators do in pandemic relief fraud cases. They issued subpoenas. Citizens Bank produced 11 months of statements for the church's checking account. Bank of America produced statements for Marielle Alexandre's checking account and for the Pompano Beach account belonging to Jocelyn Pierre's wife. AT&T produced phone records. Apple produced cloud backups. The Internal Revenue Service produced every filing the church had submitted going back to 2008. By the end of the summer of 2021, agents had a clean picture of where every dollar had gone. They had also, by then, picked up Jocelyn Pierre. Pierre was arrested in Pompano Beach in August of 2021 by agents from the SBA Office of Inspector General. He was charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud and bank fraud across applications he had prepared in at least 11 states. The total dollar figure attached to his cases would eventually exceed $19 million. He cooperated immediately. The agents who interviewed him on the second day of his detention asked him, among many other questions, about a pastor in Philadelphia. Pierre had kept records. He had email exchanges. He had handwritten notes from his phone calls with Alexandre. He had bank records of every wire transfer Alexandre had sent him. The text exchanges that came out of Pierre's recovered phone records ran to dozens of pages, a representative sample. Pierre, April 21, 2020. Pasteur, send me the EIN and the last 941. I will handle the rest. Alexandre, April 21, 2020. Make it strong, brother. I told you the first one was too small. The church needs more than that. Pierre, April 22, 2020. 26 employees, $41K a month. We bring it in around 263. Your end after my fee will be around 180. Sound good? Alexandra, April 22, 2020. Yes, do it. May God bless this work. Pierre, May 12, 2020. Money landed. Send my 79K today as we discussed. Alexandra, May 13, 2020. Wire sent. Confirm. The investigators also recovered emails between Alexandra and at least 4 members of his congregation, in which he offered, in nearly identical language, to help them with their paperwork for PPP loans on behalf of small businesses they ran. 3 of the 4 members declined. The 4th never followed through. Yvette Charles, whose call to the FBI had opened the file, identified Alexandra's handwriting on a note he had passed her after a Wednesday evening Bible study. The arrest warrant was signed by a federal magistrate judge in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania on the morning of October 4, 2022. Agents executed it the same day at 7:14 a.m. at the parsonage on North 6th Street. Alexandra answered the door in a white undershirt and gray sweatpants, holding a ceramic mug of coffee. 6 agents entered the home. 2 were FBI. 2 were IRS Criminal Investigation. 2 were from the Small Business Administration Office of Inspector General. The lead agent, Special Agent Brian Whitmore, identified himself, presented the warrant, and read Alexandra his Miranda rights. The body cam footage of the next 4 minutes was eventually entered into the record at sentencing. Whitmore: Mr. Alexandra, we have a warrant for your arrest on federal charges of wire fraud. We also have a search warrant for this residence and for the church on North 5th Street. Alexandra: I don't understand. There is some mistake here. The church is a place of God. I have done nothing. Whitmore: Sir, do you recognize the name Jocelyn Pierre? Alexandra: I have many people I speak with. I cannot remember every name. Kowalski: Pastor, we have phone records. We have email exchanges. We have wire transfer confirmations from your bank to his bank. This conversation is going to go a lot better for you if you speak honestly with us right now. Alexandra: The money was for the church. The church needed the money. The pandemic was difficult for everyone. I did what I had to do to keep the doors open for my people. Whitmore: Sir, you used the church to apply for those loans. The church did not benefit from the proceeds. You did. Your sister did. Your consultant in Florida did. Alexandre: I want to call my lawyer. He set the coffee mug down on the kitchen counter without finishing the sip he had begun. He was handcuffed in his own foyer at 7:23 a.m. and walked to an unmarked sedan parked at the curb. 2 neighbors watched from their porches. A third recorded the scene from the upstairs window of the row house directly across the street. Stories like this one do not get the attention they deserve. A $250,000 theft from a pandemic relief program run out of a storefront church in North Philadelphia, and you will not find it on the front page of any newspaper in this country. If you want to see more accountability coverage like this, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We do this every single week, and the verdict in this one is worth sticking around for. A federal grand jury in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania returned a 2-count indictment against Rooldy Alexandre on November 9, 2022. Count 1 charged wire fraud in connection with the first PPP loan application. Count 2 charged wire fraud in connection with the second draw application. Each count carried a statutory maximum of 20 years in federal prison and a fine of up to $250,000. Alexandre's defense attorney was Lawrence Kessler, a Philadelphia criminal defense lawyer with 31 years of experience in federal court. Kessler filed an initial motion to suppress the body cam footage on Fourth Amendment grounds. The motion was denied. He filed a second motion to sever the 2 counts for separate trials. That motion was denied. By March of 2023, Kessler had advised his client to consider a plea agreement, and by July of 2023, that agreement was filed with the court. Alexandre pleaded guilty to both counts of wire fraud on July 24, 2023. In open court, he admitted that he had knowingly submitted false information in support of 2 PPP loan applications for Église évangélique de la Nouvelle Alliance, that he had used the proceeds for personal purposes, and that he had recruited his sister to assist in laundering the funds. He admitted that he had offered, in at least 4 documented instances, to assist members of his own congregation in submitting similarly false applications for their own benefit and his. Sentencing was set for February 2025 before United States District Judge Gerald J. Pappert. The pre-sentence report calculated a guideline range of 30 to 37 months. The government recommended a sentence at the top of that range. Kessler argued for a downward variance based on his client's lack of criminal history, his 15 years of service to the Olney community, and what Kessler described as a stress-induced lapse in judgment during a moment of unprecedented institutional crisis. Victim impact statements were heard from 2 members of the congregation. The first was Yvette Charles. She stood at the lectern in her Sunday clothes, looked directly at Alexandre, and read from a single sheet of paper. "Pastor," she said, "you told us every Sunday that the money in the offering plate belonged to God. You told us to trust you with that money. You stood in front of the cross, and you said those things, and then you took money that did not even belong to your congregation. You took it from the country that took my family in. You took it from the country my son wears the uniform of. There is no scripture that says that is acceptable. There is no prayer that makes it acceptable. I came here today so the court would hear from one of the people you stood in front of every week." Judge Pappert imposed sentence on the morning of February 27, 2025. His statement from the bench ran more than 9 minutes. "Mr. Alexandre," he said, "you were a man entrusted by your congregation with their spiritual care. You were also entrusted, in a far less personal sense, by the citizens of this country with the proceeds of an emergency program designed to keep small businesses and nonprofits alive during the worst public health crisis in a century. You betrayed both of those trusts. You did so not in a single moment of weakness, but over the course of nearly 2 years, with deliberation, with the assistance of a professional fraud preparer in Florida, and with the recruited assistance of your own sister. You also attempted, in at least 4 documented instances, to recruit members of the congregation that trusted you to participate in the same scheme. The sentence I impose today must reflect not only the financial harm, but the deeper harm to public confidence in institutions of faith and in programs of federal relief, which the citizens of this district and this country agreed to fund precisely because they trusted institutions like yours to use the money honestly. The judge imposed a sentence of 24 months of incarceration to be served at the federal prison camp at Lewisburg in central Pennsylvania, a minimum security facility for non-violent offenders. He imposed 3 years of supervised release to follow. He ordered restitution in the full amount of $662,454, payable jointly and severally with the co-defendants. He ordered Alexandre to surrender to the Bureau of Prisons on April 14, 2025. Marielle Alexandre was sentenced separately to a term of 14 months for her role in the laundering scheme. Jocelyn Pierre, the Florida consultant, received a 63-month sentence in a Southern District of Florida case that consolidated his work across multiple states. Église évangélique de la Nouvelle Alliance ceased holding services in the storefront on North 5th Street in April of 2024. The lease was not renewed by the property owner. The congregation dispersed to other small Haitian churches in the Olney and Logan neighborhoods. Yvette Charles found a new spiritual home at a Pentecostal congregation on Old York Road. She still has the note he passed her in the fellowship hall, kept in a manila folder in the top drawer of a filing cabinet in her basement. He reported to Lewisburg on the morning he was ordered to. He arrived in a borrowed sedan driven by his wife. He carried a small canvas bag containing the items the Bureau of Prisons allows incoming inmates to bring with them: a Bible, eyeglasses, prescription medication, a single change of clothes. His projected release date is in early 2027. He will be 56 years old. This case was hard to sit with. But the case on the right-hand side, what that man did with the trust placed in him by people who had no one else to turn to, is even harder. Click it now.